Hey everybody. It wasn't long since I had recently uploaded a video where I go through and show you a Dell system. I think it's a Vostro 420 that is designed drastically different than most Dell computers, and that the machine is easily upgradable. You know, with a lot of Dell computers, usually the way they're designed is they take a lot of measures that tend to prevent you from being able to reuse the case for a new system build or something like that. For example, over in the back of this junk over here, that XPS 400 is a good example. It uses kind of like a BTX form factor board, and a lot of the headers, the pinouts, are not standardized. They're just kind of Dell's special design. The power supply is a standard ATX unit, but the motherboard doesn't take on your standard ATX design. And a system like that would be very difficult to reuse the case for a new system build. But when I was going through some older stuff, I come across this Dimension 2400 that was recently donated to me. And I got to thinking, perhaps could you be able to reuse a case like this for a new system build? Again, this is a Dimension 2400 from 2004. Has a Pentium 4 processor in it. And although these cases are quite dated, they're not necessarily bad looking cases. They have okay ventilation. I mean, I wouldn't recommend using them for a high-end system, but a lot of today's newer processors tend to run, in some cases, cooler or put out less heat than some of these older chips did. So let's have a look inside this thing and see if we could perhaps reuse this case for a new system build if we wanted to. So first and foremost, we'll start out by pulling off the side panel. Then we can have a nice look inside of it. I cleaned this one out pretty recently because I intended on doing something with it, probably parting it out. And of course, with most of these Dells from this era, the CPU is cooled by way of pulling air across the heatsink and out the rear fan. This pulls up out of the way and it reveals the rest of the board. Motherboard has Japanese capacitors, at least through here I see Rubicons, and has pretty chunky heatsink on the voltage regulator module for the CPU. Motherboard takes on a standard ATX design. Same goes for your power supply. This power supply is a 200 watt unit made by Delta. Dell did throw in 200 watt units in some of their systems from this time. I'm not sure why. I think 250 watts would have been better. The 12 volt rail on this power supply is only rated for 10 amps. Yeah, it's not a whole lot, especially with today's newer hardware. The hard drive is situated up front, and depending on how the system was ordered, sometimes Dell would throw in a second drive bay, which would just pop in behind the first one, so you could have up to 2 hard drives in one of these. So let's go ahead and tear down this system, shall we? We'll start by pulling out the optical drives from the hard drive. My cordless screwdriver, battery is getting pretty low on it. It'll be the first time I've ever had to recharge it since I got it. So it may not make it through this video. Perhaps I should have went ahead and disconnected the cables first. The front bezel has to pop off. And on these machines, there are a couple of snaps. It's a matter of finding them. Once you find the two snaps, it just comes right off. Some of these Dell machines included a floppy disk drive. For the ones that did not include the floppy drive, they just put this little cover into place, which snaps out like that. I'm going to put it back in though, because I don't intend on using a floppy drive in this one. Besides, the floppy drive has a special button that sticks through here. So that's out of the way. And these two drives should just slide out. DVD-ROM drive and a CD burner. Just in case you were wondering how many IDE drives, or IDE, CD, or DVD drives I have. I want you to look at that big tower right there. I've been doing some machine upgrades recently, and part of those machine upgrades involve pulling out the IDE drives and replacing them with SATA optical drives to interface with the new motherboard. So I have a crap ton of IDE optical drives. I'm going to probably be getting rid of some. Put these to the side. So we have to pull the cables out so you can get a better view of what's in here. Disconnect the power cable. I'll be honest, guys. This is back from the time when pretty much all consumer Dells were custom ordered. You couldn't just go to Walmart or Best Buy and pick one up. You had to call. You had to actually call Dell, or I think you could order them online at the time, and you would had them custom configured to your price point and stuff like that. This machine has a Pentium 4, I think 2.53 gigahertz processor, but only 256 megs of RAM. Yeah, people. I guess some people thought they could, they get the higher end processor, but we'll skimp on the RAM. Which in turn made the machine run more like a Celeron system. It isn't just the CPU that determines your computer's performance, but also the RAM. I'm going to pull out this modem. Let's get you a close range view here at the motherboard. So yeah, a lot of the newer Dells from like 2005, 2006 onward, many of them use the sort of BTX style form factor, and it was just the way they designed it was really proprietary in design. But with this system, it appears we have a regular ATX motherboard, micro ATX motherboard. This cable here, down below, interfaces with the headphone jack up front. Now this isn't really a standard style connector. Normally your headers would consist of the either, at this time, the AC97 or audio codec 1997 header, or the high definition audio header, which looks similar to a USB header. This here is the USB header, which I may pull out the header here shortly to test it. This right here is the front panel indicator and power button header, and this in fact does take on the standard style pinout. from like 2002 or 2003 onward, sometime around then, motherboards started using a standardized pinout for the front panel. And it makes it a whole lot more convenient than having to reference the motherboard manual. Have to know where to plug in the ID indicator or your hard drive indicator, power indicator, power button, reset button, you know, all that stuff. Instead, it's all integrated into this one plug. So that's already looking good so far. So we'll go ahead and start taking up motherboard screws. Since this is an older machine, I don't really care. I'll just use the cordless screwdriver. Yeah, with newer motherboards, especially if I'm doing assembly, I'll actually use my screwdriver. I will use the screwdriver for that one, if I can find it. Oh, it's on the floor, go figure. And I'll go and use it for this one in the far back corner. And normally by now you think, I'm just going to pull the motherboard out. Not happening. Here's why. These things can be a real pain to get out sometimes. Essentially, what Dell has done with the design of their computers during this time was, in addition to mounting the motherboard traditionally with its regular holes, they've also, on these Intel systems, mounted, and it feels like it's pulling the processor right out of the motherboard. Hate it when it does that. It pulled the chip right out of the motherboard. And it's a socket 478 Intel. The same processor that on my Cooking with Intel episode 1 everybody likes to call an AMD. Just like that total genius right there. It isn't an Intel processor, it is an F and AMD. You think so, huh? But anyways, processor is out, and down here, normally you would have some plastic rivet pins that would hold this to the motherboard. However, Dell went a step further by putting standoffs on the back of the case and mounting it through the board. This isn't a bad design, by the way. What this does is it helps take stress off the motherboard. So the actual chassis is holding the weight of the heatsink, which I find it funny that Dell would go to this extreme given their heat sinks usually didn't weigh much of anything. But this comes out. I'm going to unplug the power supply connector. And now the motherboard slides out. And I gotta disconnect this fan header. Which, by the way, I should have mentioned, is a special Dell type of design. But it will plug into a standard fan header on your regular motherboard. I reuse those Dell, those JMC Daytech fans all the time. They're excellent fans, especially when you bypass the thermistor and run at full speed or run it using your motherboard's speed control. So here are the 4 standoffs, which luckily they just unscrew right out. You may notice there's an A and a B. Depending on the motherboard that they use in the system, they would put the standoffs in either 1 or 2 spots. Because they had like 2 different style motherboards. I actually disassembled another one earlier today. So pull all 4 of these out. That one felt like it was already loose. Okay, so now it brings up another question. I'm just going to pull the hard drive out of the system, get it out of the way. I'm going to be pulling it out of its cage anyways. Just going ahead and using my regular screwdriver because that cordless one's about dead. So here is the hard drive. Nothing too special to see there. This is your standard 3.5-inch hard drive. And as I mentioned earlier, with this style of Dell chassis, you can mount up to 2 hard drives in it. The fan, the rear exhaust fan, there's a little pull here. Whole thing slides down, out it comes. So you could reuse the fan here in your rebuild, and also I should mention this here. You pull it out and lift up. You should be able to pull this flap off. So theoretically you could leave this in like this and use it as a case fan. And what's nice is, as I mentioned, most of these Dell, this here is actually a Motherboard fan, so it's not a JMC Daytech, but it does use the thermistor for sensing heat. So you can supply full 12 volts to this fan, and it will self-regulate based on internal system temperature. So we're going to put that to the side. I should also mention that it appears the case will take a standard 92mm fan. There are 4 holes on the back grill. As you may see. And another thing to look for, which is looking good for us, is the IO shield plate is replaceable. and it's your standard style I/O shield plate. Let's see if I can get it out by punching it out. It's your standard I/O shield plate. Let me just confirm that. Yep, it's standard. It's the exact same size as this one from an E-machine system, and that could just pop right in. So now that the motherboard has been pulled out, let you have a good look here. These are all the standoffs for the motherboard. Unfortunately, these are fixed and you can't move them around. However, I will mention they do seem to be compatible with most motherboards out there in the micro ATX form factor. The only one that may pose a problem is this one down here. Like, for example, the motherboards I've been using for the Ryzen 3 2200G and Ryzen 5 2400G system builds I've been doing, or system upgrades I've been doing in those E-Machines chassis. Some of the E-Machines chassis have the standoff here when it should be here for that particular board. And in this case, since I can't move it, what I would, depending on how far the board hangs down, I would probably have to cover this with electrical tape or something of that nature. But so far so good. The case uses pretty much a standard micro ATX form factor motherboard. The I/O shield plate is replaceable. The power supply, which of course, unless the machine has the standard 250 watt power supply and you're using a basic build, you would probably want to replace that power supply with something better, which looks like the case offers no problems there. If you've been working on computers for a while, you may recall the HP and Compaq mini towers from like 2002 through 2005 or that time period, 2006 maybe. Yeah, actually even 2007. But a lot of times they would design the power supply opening to where the receptacle of some replacement power supplies would not, it would bump up against it and the power supply would not fully sit in place. Some people would just switch the power supply around upside down and put it in, which would work. But typically you want to install the power supply if the power supply is up in the top of the system, you typically want the circuit board and the power supply to be on the top side. It's usually how they're installed, and the fan to be facing, where this one here is. So, things are looking good. Now, I'm not going to actually build a system in this case today, but I may be doing it sometime later on. Now, let's go ahead and take out the front panel header. Which I will be putting it back in afterwards, but we're going to take it out just for a moment. So that way we can test out the USB ports, which I believe, I'm very well certain they take on the standard pin out. In some cases, and I will mention some cases, the coloring of the wires is different than your typical colors used on a USB cable internal header. But I do believe this one does take on the standard pinout. So first we'll start out by trying out the case header, which there it is, and here's another one from another case. Since I already have it out, I'll just go ahead and try it. Here's the computer Plexi already running. Don't try this at home, people. No, just be careful if you do. I've just disconnected the front panel header, which you may have seen the LED and stuff go out. Plug this one in. And you see the power indication LED is lit up, and you can see the hard drive activity indicator is flashing, and the power button does in fact work. As a matter of fact, I turned the system on using this power button earlier when I done my initial testing. So I'm going to disconnect that and put the other one back in its place. There we are. And since this motherboard has 2 additional USB 2.0 headers available, we're going to try out the USB port, which is why I pulled it out. And it's keyed properly. You see on the bottom there is a missing pin. If the camera will focus. There you are. We'll just go ahead and plug that in like so. Yeah, I've got this old USB stick. And it works. As you may see, the indicator is working. So, that means the USB header is in fact compatible. Now guys, I would not have plugged that in and tried a USB device if I wasn't exactly certain it was compatible. I'm just curious how many of you guys were probably holding your breath. It's like, oh no, is he going to fry the motherboard? Or oh no, is he going to fry the USB stick? No, I already knew. So, I'll pop that back into place however the heck it went in. So I went to the front. Pop this back in. So, it looks like if you have an older Dell chassis from this era, you can in fact reuse it to build your system. The ventilation is okay. It could be better. Like, I'm not particularly pleased about how the side panel has no vent on it, but on the front, as you may see, we have lots of ventilation here. We have a good sized vent next to the expansion ports, or the expansion slots rather, and of course you have the big grill where the 92mm fan goes. One more thing I should mention is I need to locate that drive, which is right here. There's 2 of them actually. But these drives on the front, they use a special kind of screw. Just if you're parting out a system like this, make sure you retain those screws. And they offer on the front of the case. Sorry, I'm moving the tripod around so much. They offer two extra holes. I'm about to go ahead and use those to retain these screws, because I do plan to put a system in this. I don't know if it's going to be one of those Ryzen 3 or 5 APU systems, or if it's going to be a refurbished computer. I have not decided yet. But it looks like this case will in fact take a standard motherboard. The only downsides to this case are, number 1, you can't put an internal card reader in the front. Number 2, you don't have USB 3.0 for newer systems. And number 3, the front panel headphone jack, you won't be able to use it unless you did some serious modding to it. Which could be done, but it's In my opinion, it's not really worth the trouble. Unless you really, really, really want to plug your headphones in the front of the computer. So let's go ahead and drive these back into place. I should also mention that those cases I mentioned from HP and Compaq have a similar design where they house additional screws behind the front bezel. So, I know I've probably mentioned it 100 times now, but it looks good. It looks like you could easily reuse this case for a system build with some limitations. So if you wanted to, you could put your Ryzen 5 2400G in this and surprise your friends and your buddies, make them think you have an old piece of crap Dell from 2004, but actually have a blazing fast system. Overall, it's not a bad case. You can just call it the fake Dell. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Well guys, that's it for this one. But it doesn't have to be. There's plenty more videos on the channel to check out. Also, if you liked the video, please click the like button. And if you absolutely hated it, there is the alternative button as well. But yeah, please subscribe to the channel. I definitely appreciate it. And remember to click the bell so that we get notified of all updates. Also, if you're interested in things aside from computers and technology, check out my second channel. It's CubeCompMTDX. Over there you'll find videos about weather, elevators, bicycling, and pretty much whatever else I figure out to upload. So yeah, anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you for your support.